I'm Sam from GForce and this is the Novation base station. In this video, I'm going to walk you through every aspect of the synthesizer, allowing you to master it for use in your own productions. We've worked closely with Novation to create an accurate emulation of the classic instrument, originally released in 1993. We've added a whole host of augmentations to bring it into the 21st century, expanding upon its sound palette and features. We start with accurate emulations of both oscillators, adding a sine wave to both. We also have a sub-oscillator for oscillator 1, sub-FM for oscillator 2, and a noise mount as well. Base station is now 16-voice polyphonic with a unison mode and contains the classic dual mode filter, which is full of character and can get nice and aggressive. We've added our X modifiers to provide a dedicated LFO and ADSR to most parameters, along with an output screen so you can see exactly how much modulation you're applying. On the effects side, we've got a high-pass filter, switchable between 12 and 24 dB, a distortion with 4 different modes, a chorus, a delay, and a reverb. We've added a new sequencer with lanes for both of our macros, and a nice creative arpeggiator. We've included our vintage knob so that you can add flavour to your sounds, and a pan spread to give your sounds a larger-than-life width. We've of course included our extensive browser, which features favourites and collections. Base Station comes with hundreds of presets to get you started. You can switch presets by clicking either the up and down arrows, the title of the preset, or the icon to the left of the preset bar. When you first open up Base Station, you'll be greeted by this preset, Spider Bites. Let's reset to our init patch and go through each section of the instrument one by one, starting with our LFO. We have controls for speed, delay, a retrigger that decides whether the LFO starts each time a key is pressed or whether it's played continuously, and clock sync. In terms of shapes, we have triangle, sine, a saw, square, and a random. The LFO can be applied to pitch modulation of either oscillator 1 or oscillator 2, as well as pulse width modulation of both oscillators. It can also be applied to the cutoff frequency of the filter. Oscillator 1 has just a single direct control, that being the waveform selection. We've added a sine wave to the original sawtooth and pulse waveforms. We've also added a sub-oscillator. This can be brought up using an independent level control. This can be set to -1 or -2 octaves and features the same 3 waveforms as the main oscillator. Oscillator 1 also features the oscillator mix control, which allows you to set the balance between oscillators 1 and 2. Oscillator 2 has a range of features which allow you to create thick, powerful sounds. We have a fine detune with a range of plus or minus 100 cents, and a semitone detune with a range of plus or minus 12 semitones. There's a sync which syncs oscillator 2 to oscillator 1, a range which sets the frequency around which the detuning occurs, and the 3 waveform selection as per the other oscillator. We've added a couple of other features to the oscillator section to increase sound design capabilities. We've got a white noise with an independent level, and oscillator 2 sub-FM, which takes the output of oscillator 1's sub-wave and uses it to frequency modulate oscillator 2. As you turn the knob up, you increase the amount of exponential FM applied to oscillator 2. The FM signal always follows the sub-oscillator's settings, allowing you to use any of the three waveforms and set the octave as you wish. When used with oscillator sync, the sub-FM can act as a sort of wave shaping, allowing you to create tones that weren't possible on the original hardware. Next we have our oscillator modulation section, which is comprised of two identical sets of controls, one set for oscillator 1 and one set for oscillator 2. The two left-hand knobs are relevant for pitch modulation. Firstly, we can set the amount of modulation from envelope 2, this is a bipolar control, and secondly we can set the amount of modulation from the LFO, this is also a bipolar control. The two controls on the right-hand side are relevant to pulse width modulation. To the far right, we're able to set the pulse width modulation source. We can choose envelope 1, envelope 2, the LFO, or manually set the pulse width. With the knob, we can set the amount of pulse width modulation to be applied. This is only relevant when using the pulse waveform on either oscillator. Let's take a look at the filter, which features 12 and 24 dB cutoff modes. As per the hardware, in the 12 dB mode, the filter's frequency range is limited between 115 Hz and 610 Hz. There is automatic keyboard tracking applied. You can modulate the filter cutoff frequency using envelope 2 or the LFO. The envelope 2 amount is unipolar and always positive. The LFO amount is bipolar. When switching to the 24 dB cutoff mode, the filter's frequency range is increased, with a range of 20 Hz to 12 kHz. There is a separate keyboard tracking knob added, allowing you to manually set the amount of tracking applied. Envelope 2 modulation is now also bipolar, allowing you to subtract from the filter cutoff frequency as well as add to it. Base station features two envelopes, each with identical controls. Envelope 1 is the amplitude envelope and can also be set to control the pulse width of either oscillator. Envelope 2 is the modulation envelope, and it can be applied to the filter and to oscillator modulation of both the pulse width and frequency. Each envelope features an attack, decay, sustain and release control, as well as a velocity control which allows you to apply velocity modulation to each envelope. If we click on the button labelled Mod in the top right hand corner of our scope window, we'll open the modulation panel. In this area, we can set the modulation amounts and destinations of four different sources, those being pitch bend, mod wheel, aftertouch and velocity. The pitch bend range knob allows you to set the range of the pitch bend from 2 to 48 semitones. It also features a lock so that this carries over between preset changes. There are four destinations for the pitch bend. You can either send it to both oscillators, send it to oscillator 1 only, send it to oscillator 2 only, or send it to both oscillators but with oscillator 2 inverted. The mod wheel, aftertouch and velocity controls are all bipolar, allowing you to apply positive and negative modulation amounts to their destinations. The mod wheel can be sent to the filter frequency, the oscillator mix, the sub-FM amount, the noise level, the amount of LFO pitch modulation applied to oscillator 1 and 2, and the amount of pulse width modulation applied to oscillator 1 and 2. Aftertouch and velocity feature the same destinations, those being the filter frequency, gain, the LFO rate, oscillator mix, Oscillator 2 fine tune, sub-FM amount, noise level, the amount of LFO pitch modulation applied to Oscillator 1 or Oscillator 2, the amount of pulse width modulation applied to Oscillator 1 or Oscillator 2, and both macros 1 and 2. This small section provides an incredibly diverse range of modulation options, allowing you to send different amounts to every destination and create evolving and complex sounds with ease. Let's move up to our extended section and have a look at the further modulation options provided by XMods. You can show or hide the extended section by clicking the icon in the top right hand corner with the two arrows. Each XMod features an XLFO and an XADSR. When you click on a parameter that can have XMods assigned, the selected parameter display will show the name of that parameter. With a parameter selected, you're now able to apply modulation to just that destination. The XLFO is a versatile LFO with a wide range of controls. We have an individual retrig option, a global sync which applies to all XLFOs and all XADSRs. Then we have the ability to select the shape of the XLFO. We can choose sine, triangle, ramp up, ramp down, square, unipolar square, brown noise, or a randomized sine wave. With our shape selected, we're able to set the amount of LFO modulation, time of that LFO, the delay before that LFO occurs when a note is held, a sample and hold rate as a percentage of the LFO speed, smoothing, and the phase of the LFO. As an amount of XMod modulation is applied, you'll see a corona begin to grow around the selected parameter. Moving on to the XADSR, we're first presented with two knobs. One is a bipolar amplitude amount, setting the amount of modulation applied to the selected parameter. The other is a bipolar velocity control, setting the amount of velocity modulation applied to that XADSR. We then have controls for attack and decay. Slope start, which is a bipolar control which sets the point at which the decay stage ends, and slope time, which determines how long it takes to return to zero from that point. We also have a release. The release is related to the envelope 1 release, and as such will be cut off if the envelope 1 release reaches zero before it does. With our modulation set up, we can use the output section in the centre of the XMod area to get live feedback of how our modulation will affect our parameter. We also have 3 buttons to help with managing XMods. We can copy our modulation to another parameter, we can paste existing modulation from another parameter, or we can clear the currently applied modulation. XMods provide an incredible amount of sound design potential, allowing you to take a simple preset somewhere completely unique. Let's take a look at the 5 effects that are included in Base Station. Each features a power button in the top left-hand corner, allowing you to turn the effect on and off, and a lock, allowing you to keep the effect's settings when switching between presets. The high-pass filter is first in the chain. It's switchable between 12 and 24 dB modes and features frequency, resonance and keyboard tracking controls. It's perfect for sculpting the low end of your sounds. Next we have the distortion that features 4 different types: soft, hard, exponential and harmonic. There are controls for drive, tone and mix. The drive controls the amount of distortion while the tone controls the brightness. Playing with the relationship between drive, tone and mix will allow you to get a wide range of distortion effects, everything from subtle saturation all the way up to clipped chaos. We then come to our 4-mode chorus, with controls for depth, rate, and mix. Each of the modes has been designed to provide a unique flavour to your sounds. Next up, we have a stereo delay. We have independent time control for the left and right channels, a feedback mount, and a level control. We have buttons that allow us to sync to clock, link the time controls, or turn on the crossfeed mode. Finally, we have our reverb, which features 5 presets, as well as controls for pre-delay, size, decay, mod frequency, mod depth, and a filter, which can be set to either high pass or low pass using the bipolar control. There's also an overall level control. In combination, these 5 effects allow you to add a whole range of character to your sounds, taking your presets to entirely new places. Let's take a look at the controls situated around the keyboard. The voices control allows us to select the number of available voices from 1 to 16. The number of voices applies to the polyphonic and unison modes. The mode display allows us to select between 4 different playing modes. We have poly, in which multiple notes can be played simultaneously, each with their own envelopes. Single or legato mode, a monophonic mode in which only a single set of envelopes will run for the duration of all the notes held. Multi or mono mode, another monophonic mode in which every note played will re-trigger the envelopes. And auto glide. In this position, if a note is held down and the second note pressed, the oscillators will glide to the new note without reloops. Next we have the unison knob. This is a dual function knob in that when it is set to 0, no unison is applied. As you turn the knob up, unison is enabled using the number of voices set above, and the voices are detuned as the knob increases to its maximum value. Below the unison we have the vintage knob. Turning this up will decalibrate a large number of parameters, adding age and drift to the base station. The bottom knob is the porter or portamento knob. Turning this up increases the time it takes to glide from one pitch to another each time a note is held. This portamento also applies to unison mode. Underneath the mode screen, we have a 5-way octave switch which allows you to offset your playing by plus or minus 2 octaves. Underneath the octave switches, we have pitch and mod wheel controls. To the top right of the keyboard, we have a hold switch. With this enabled, any key pressed is held indefinitely. To the right of the keyboard we have our master volume control, which allows you to attenuate the outgoing signal from 0 dB downwards. Underneath the master volume we have our stereo spread control. Turning this up increases the width of the voices in the stereo field. It's perfect for creating immersive and spacious sound. Also to the right of the keyboard, we have 2 identical macros. Macros are incredibly useful for making large changes to a sound with just a single interaction. To assign a macro, we click and drag on the crosshairs to the right of the macro knob. Any parameter that can have a macro assigned will highlight blue as you hover over it, and you simply release to assign the macro. You can then right-click and drag on that parameter to assign a macro amount. Clicking on the display to the right of the macro knob allows you to see all of the macro destinations that have been assigned, remove them individually, or remove them all at once. With some macros assigned, let's take a look at the sequencer. You can get to the sequencer by either clicking the switch just above the keyboard on the left hand side, or by clicking the sequencer icon in the top right hand corner of the plugin. By default, the sequencer is off. We click the sequencer button to turn it on. Down the left hand side we have our overall controls of the sequencer. Here we can set the rate, its swing, how many octaves it transposes over, if any, and the playing mode, which can be either forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards, or random. We can also set the state of the sequencer. There are three options for this: cycle, in which the sequence will run whenever base station receives a clock; key, in which the sequence will play when you press a key and stop when you release it; and hold, in which the sequence will play when you press a key but keep playing until you change the sequencer state. Both key and hold will transpose the first note of your sequence to match whichever note has been input. Next we have record mode. We click on this to start recording. We can then use a MIDI controller to input notes into our sequence step by step. Record mode will automatically deactivate once all 16 steps have been recorded into, or if you manually stop the recording by pressing the record button again. Below the record button we have the reset button. Clicking this will remove all note and macro information from your sequencer. Below the reset button, we have the MIDI button. Clicking and dragging on this will create a MIDI file of your sequence. You're able to drag this directly into your DAW or to a folder on your computer. Now we move on to the sequencer proper. It's a maximum of 16 steps long with flexible start and end points. Each step has accent, slide and probability controls, and there are lanes for notes as well as each of the macros. Let's take a look at each control. To start off with, we have a padlock. Turning this on will lock your sequencer and keep it persistent when switching presets. Below the padlock, we have the note and macro page switch. Clicking on either note or macro will show the sequencer relevant to those controls. Next we have the accent amount parameter. This determines how much of an increase the velocity and the two macros have when an accent is applied. Set to 100%, this means that when an accent is applied, velocity and the two macro amounts are doubled unless they reach their maximum clipped value. The scale parameter allows you to quantize the notes of your sequence. You can set them to any notes, major, minor, harmonic, or melodic scales. This parameter is not present in the macro sequencer. We now come to the randomizer functions, which we'll use to build a sequence. We have randomizers for pitch, note length, velocity, and both of the macros in the macro sequencer screen. Each of these randomizers has range controls, allowing you to set upper and lower boundaries for the randomization. With our sequence now generated, we can start to edit it more comprehensively. We can set the start and end points of our sequence by clicking and dragging the two flags, and we're able to set our start point to a higher step than our end point. We can add accents or slides to any step by simply clicking on the accent or slide button located above each step. Slide, when on, extends the note length of a step to 100% and creates a pitch glide between the current note and the next note. The glide does not begin until the next note starts. The glide takes 100% of the next note length to move from the previous pitch to the next one. For example, if the next note has a length of 50%, the glide takes that same 50% time to complete. An accented step, as previously mentioned, applies the global accent amount as a percentage increase to a step's velocity, macro 1 and macro 2 values. With velocity assigned to envelopes or in the modulation section, or macros applied to any number of parameters, accents can be used to add an immense amount of character to individual sequence steps. Let's take a look at adding and removing notes and setting their length. A single left click will add, move, or remove a note within its given step. Clicking and dragging horizontally on that note will alter the note's length within that step. To alter a step's octave, we simply click in the octave box and drag up or down. To alter a step's velocity, we do the same in the velocity box. Single left click with the drag up and down. Step probability is interacted with the same way and acts as a percentage chance that the step will occur. We simply click and drag up or down on the probability box to set the chance of the step taking place. Step probability is a great way to add variation to repeating sequences. The macro sequencer screen features similar randomization controls as the note sequencer, as well as individual sliders per step to set the macro sequencer amount. The macro sequencer shares start and end points, accents, slides, probability, and the accent amount with the note sequencer. Right-clicking and dragging probability, octave, velocity, or macro amounts allows you to set all 16 steps with the same value. Right-clicking and dragging on a note allows you to draw notes across the grid in a single movement. Flicking the sequencer switch to Arpeggiator brings up the Arpeggiator controls. Here we can set the Arpeggiator rate, its swing, its octave transposition, and its playback mode. The available mode options are up, down, random, and a chord mode. Below this we have a probability amount. This determines how likely it is that each note in the arpeggio will play. When in chord mode, the probability determines the likelihood of each individual note in the chord playing, allowing you to get rhythmic variations of a chord with ease. Let's take a look at the settings screen. If you're in standalone mode, you'll see the audio and MIDI settings. Here you can set your audio output and your MIDI input devices. We now have a number of instrument settings that are available in both standalone and plug-in mode. Firstly, we have allow tail off on host transport stop. With this on, envelope release tails will continue after you press stop in your host DAW. With this off, envelope release tails will stop when you stop your host DAW. Next we have the maximum internal buffer size. This sets the fidelity of parameter modulation and control. Lower settings will provide smoother modulations, but will use up more of your CPU resources. Next is Patch Browser Font Scale, which unsurprisingly allows you to set the scale of the font in the browser. Tooltip timeout length allows you to set the tooltip timeout length in seconds. Macro adjustment modifier allows you to set how macro amounts are applied. By default, this is done by right-click and drag. Show macro helper message allows you to enable or disable the pop-up window that gives you guidance on how to apply macros. Next, we have the Smooth VCO Tune Adjustment modifier, which is Command or Control by default. This is the modifier used to perform smooth tuning of your VCOs. Finally, we have polyphonic pitch bend. If your host DAW or MIDI controller supports this, you can turn it on here. Let's have a look at the functions of the browser. Let's start by loading an init preset. We can get to the browser by either clicking on the preset name in the top bar or the browser icon to the left of the preset bar. In the bottom left-hand corner of the browser, you'll see the Init Patch button. Let's click on that, and an initialized patch is loaded. Let's load a random preset to get some inspiration. We return to the browser, and in the bottom right-hand corner you can see a random button. Clicking on that will load a patch at random from your collection. As I browse through presets, I can add them to my favourites list by clicking the heart icon next to the name. Let's have a look at the sorting options now. Just above the list of presets on the right hand side, you'll see the sorting icon. Clicking on this gives us a number of different ways to sort our patches. We can sort by favourites, alphabetically, reverse alphabetically, and by alpha patches first, which is the default sorting method. Tags are incredibly useful for honing in on the kind of sound that you want. There are 3 columns of them. Category, which gives you a broader overview of the preset that you're looking for. Types, which define the function of the preset. And timbres, which define its character. I can select multiple tags to further filter my selection by Command or Control plus a click. Types and timbres have OR and visibility states. For example, selecting both the dynamic and evolving tags with the OR flag on will show all patches that contain either dynamic or evolving tags. Changing that to AND will only show patches that contain the dynamic and evolving tags. Using the search bar above the list of patches allows us to filter our sounds in another way. We can search for patch name, we can search by patch author, and we can look for keywords in patch notes. You'll see we can also audition patches down at the bottom as we browse through them, and directly control the macros from within the patch browser. We also have the program change function, allowing you to set a list of patches that will be recalled by MIDI program change messages. Let's have a look at collections. You can create a new collection at the point of saving any patch. You simply define the collection in the left-hand column by either selecting an existing one or typing it into the box at the bottom and pressing the plus icon. Collections are managed by clicking the folder icon at the top of the collection column. Here you can import, export and delete collections. Let's try importing one now. We click on the import button, browse to where that collection is on our computer, and we'll see a pop-up showing the number of patches imported. That collection now appears in the left-hand column of the browser. Once we're happy with the patch that we've made, it's time to save it. We do this by clicking the Save icon on the right-hand side of the preset title bar. This will open the Save dialog window. Starting from the left-hand side, we choose our collection or add a new one. We choose a category or add a new one. We choose our types, or we can add new type tags. And again, we choose our timbres, or we can add new timbre tags if desired. We then move on to editing the metadata of the patch. First we name the patch, then we give it an author's name. Then we write some patch notes to explain to other people what the patch is about. We can then name both of our macros to give insight into their function. With all of that filled in, we simply click Save. If you're trying to overwrite an existing patch, you'll be given a warning message prompting you to use Quick Save. This is done by Command or Control plus click, either on the Save button in the dialog window or directly on the icon in the plugin. Let's have a look at the CC mapping features of the base station. To assign CC, we click on the little CC icon on the right-hand side of the footer bar. This will show us the CC mapping overlay. Here we can click on any parameter that is CC mappable and simply turn the relevant control on our MIDI controller or send the relevant CC from our DAW. CC mappings are saved automatically, but if you'd like to save a CC preset, you simply click on the save icon in the footer. You can also load CC presets here and clear any mapping that has already been applied. We click the CC icon again to exit the mode. The base station also features full undo and redo. You can perform these actions by clicking the two icons in the bottom right hand corner of the footer bar. Undo is on the left and redo is on the right. And with that, we've covered pretty much everything that the base station has to offer. There's an immense amount of depth in this deceptively simple synthesizer, and we can't wait to hear what you do with it. As always, thank you so much for your support, and we hope you enjoy the base station as much as we do.